Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's get started because it's 5:30 and I think everybody's here. My dog really wants to be a part of this tonight. He keeps grumbling at me from the bed by my feet. So I'm going to do a couple of introductions. I have a few people on here I would like to introduce themselves. First of all, my name is Carrie. I am the operations coordinator at the Artisan Center. I have been in this role since January of 2020 and have really loved these artist journey events and kind of what we're doing with them. So, Jan, would you like to introduce yourself too? Are you here?
I am here. I'm Jan Scoville. I'm the Dean of Regional Learning, and I have gotten so much out of these artist journeys that I just keep tuning in. So I'm really glad to see so many of you here live tonight, and our reach on this is really fantastic after the fact too. So if there's somebody you know who couldn't attend tonight, make sure to spread the word along and have them rewatch it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been posting the recordings afterwards, and we see anywhere from 500 to almost 2,000 views afterwards, which is really cool. It's one of the positive things that have come out of the pandemic. So we got to celebrate those little wins. And then I have three people I invited here. I see you guys on the screen. Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Get my buttons to work here. My mouse fell asleep. I am Jessica Norwood. I was invited here tonight to chat kind of on the photography side. I am the full-time photography instructor on the Green Bay campus at NWTC.
So invited Terri here. Are you there, Terri?
Yep, I am also here. I suggested Jessica because she taught me everything I know, so having her here is amazing. But yes, I teach at NWTC as well. I teach in the business management program there, but I also am a photographer and take a lot of pictures and pictures for other people in their businesses as well. So.
And then Terri, you recommended, is it pronounced Shelly or Shell? Oh, you're muted.
Chelle.
Shell, perfect. So why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Chelle. I am a local artist, painter specifically. I love bright colors, if you cannot see behind me. Terri had recommended me because her and I were talking once about me going on photography adventures with my paintings, because sometimes I bring them around town to photograph them.
Cool. So I see a few more people are joining us. I don't think we'll do introductions for everybody because we only have an hour of time. So please feel free, anybody who's here tonight, to jump in, interrupt, put messages in the chat, unmute yourself and join in. I much prefer that these things are like a conversation and kind of a back and forth than just one person speaking the whole time. So I have a few notes from my perspective that I'd like to start with about why artists should photograph their work. I think that's really important, and not a lot of artists consider all of those options. So I made a list when I was preparing for this, and I think most artists think of things like, well, I'm going to photograph my paintings if I'm going to do prints of them, right? So there's one option. A lot of shows, like juried exhibitions, you have to submit photos of. Another reason to photograph. But I think some of the things people don't think about is you make a lot of work, and if you give it away, you don't have any record of it. So even just photographing your work for yourself as an artist to kind of build that catalog and also kind of see your progress, I think is really important. Another reason. At our artist in residence meeting last week, an interesting concept came up of an artist photographing her work so that she could recreate it in the future. So another reason. And then there's all the things about marketing your business, right? Your website, your social media, and all of those marketing pieces. And I think out of that entire list, all of those photos are different, right? If you are taking a photograph to reprint, it's going to be very different than the pictures you post like in social media or in progress type photos. So I want to make sure we consider all of those options when we're talking about photographing artwork and how we do that. And I'm going to show, I don't usually put a PowerPoint together for these things. I like to keep them a little casual, but when we're talking about photos, I thought maybe it would be helpful to show you guys what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my screen real quick here. Back to this PowerPoint slide and show you that I am what I'm talking about here. So I stole some pictures from my dear friend Trisha's website to show you that she shares a lot of staged photos, and I actually think these are all done digitally because when she's working with a client, she wants to show them what they look like in the space. So she posts these great photos photoshopped into somebody's home so you can get an idea of what her artwork looks like in there. But that's very different than if you were going to photograph a piece to submit to a show or for reprinting. And I don't know that this is the best photo. I think it's a little bright, a little blown out. But you can see where she cropped out the frame, right? You're just getting that image. So when you're submitting to like a juried show, this is what you want. You don't want anything getting in the way of the jurors just seeing your artwork. So those are my kind of notes kind of on my little pedestal about why I think this is so important for all of us. And now what I would love to do is talk about kind of the basics. And Jessica, Terri, Chelle, if you guys want to start and just say like what you think, what your recommendations would be for artists who are photographing their work. I can tell you that we have some fiber artists here tonight. We have some pottery artists here tonight. We have a painter here. We have a woodworker here. I'm kind of going through the list of names. So they kind of span the gamut. And for those of you who are in attendance, if you have specific questions for these photographers too, please chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. Very willing to take any questions as you think of them. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's so many reasons to take those photos. And another thing I'd throw in there is insurance purposes too. So that's another thing to consider. But I guess one of the big things is just thinking about what that main reason is for taking those photographs. Is it just to promote your work versus, making replicas and things like that? If it's a replica, you're going to want a higher quality camera to take those photos rather than maybe if you're, doing a basic setup and you're just using your phone and posting things and showing and showcasing and things like that. The camera does make a difference. So I think that's a really good starting point. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add right off of that, right off the top, but that's definitely a huge, huge piece is the camera.
I'll jump in at that point. So I do all of my photos for juried shows, kind of my record keeping, and then prints with, I've got a Nikon DSLR camera. I'm a lot more particular about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and then everything on my Instagram page for the most part is taken with my iPhone camera. It makes it easier and it's less of a hurdle for me. And quite frankly, if most people are viewing my Instagram photos on their phone, it won't matter. Because it's not, like, the quality of that is, it is what it is. Like, if you try and zoom in, maybe not the best, but for the most part, it's not necessary to be that great.
I totally agree. Oh, go ahead, Terri.
I would also say that I think like phone cameras are improving. I mean, especially if you look at like the iPhone Pro now that's out, they are improving every year and getting better and better. So it really does depend on what you're planning on using it for. And I think for some artists, taking pictures becomes a hurdle, right? Like Chelle said, like I don't want it to be a hurdle for me. I don't want to have to take it from my camera, put it onto the internet, now get it back to my phone so I can put it on Instagram or whatever you're doing. Like it tends to be a hurdle and a lot of extra work. And I think whatever you do with your photos and the purpose of it, you want to make it as easy as possible and as efficient as possible so that it doesn't seem like extra work for you. So I think that's an important thing to consider. And if all you have is a phone and you're not making prints with it, that's probably going to be just fine. Then lighting becomes the biggest issue. And I think lighting is going to be, I think for artwork should be as natural as possible, because otherwise you have to watch for color distortion and a whole lot of other things. So the more natural the light, that's why Chelle, I think, walks around town and looks for cool backdrops for her prints, because she can use the natural light. She doesn't have to worry about trying to do something in her house that's going to make it look exactly like her artwork does.
And actually, for all of my like very good quality photos for prints and things like that, I am fortunate to have a white house and a shady yard, and so I take them just outside. It means that I am very much on the lookout for good weather days. Gray picture, like kind of gray skies, but bright enough. But yeah, I'll just kind of watch out my window here and be like, oh, the garage looks good right now. I'll go take some photos.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, it's always scouting for a location. And I guess obviously everyone's artwork is different because some, are smaller pieces, maybe caters more towards tabletop type photography versus larger paintings and woodworking, whatever you're putting together, this could be a massive table that you're putting together. So having the different scenery, I guess, is kind of that big thing. And then of course that light is also absolutely key, like Terri mentioned. And natural light is going to be the best for everybody. I mean, if you're doing reproductions of your work, like a painting or something, and you're reproducing that, it might be worth considering maybe renting a studio space or having somebody help you photograph those items, because you're going to want it lit in a way to show, like the textures of the canvas or, the paint itself, showing that kind of stuff, the textures in the wood. So having that light, it's a matter of just seeing where it comes from and the angle that it's coming from and what's really bringing out that texture. A light straight onto something, that doesn't work well. We all know, like the flash on our phone, how that turns out. It can be painful. But if we see the light and how it's wrapping around a subject, having lights wrap around and kind of come in from the side make a huge difference in casting little shadows and those grooves and things like that, so that you're bringing all of that out. So even if you don't have, like Chrissy asked, what if we don't have a quality camera? Even if you don't have that, just watching for that light, your phone's going to do a lot just by having the right lighting.
When I was making my notes for this too, I wrote down, like, I'm coming at this from like a juror's perspective, right? Like I see artwork being submitted to me electronically all the time for everything we do. And I often get it like on a table full of other stuff. And it's often like the dining room table. So it's like yellow and dark. And I'm like, what is that? What am I seeing? And so that, I think that's really important too, is like, you've got to really consider who's seeing your artwork and how they're seeing it. So if you're submitting this to an application, that natural lighting is so important so the juror can get an idea of what the actual colors are. Because from natural light to like my yellowy office light right now, it's very different.
And if you mix the two, it becomes hard, because you've got the light from outside has a blue tint to it, the light from inside has a yellow, and if you have both in one photo, it makes it very difficult. And if you have smaller things, here's a random suggestion, since you mentioned like taking photos on a table and stuff. There's a company that our students go and tour and stuff like that, and they do a lot of beauty products and post it online and things like that. So it's little product photography. And if your artwork is small enough like that, doing something that is a bit more stylized, even on a tabletop, can be as simple as buying scrapbook paper and having different textures of scrapbook paper that you kind of lay out and tile out, and just little things like sprigs of greens or whatever you want to add to it, and then your product with it. And it's not a big setup, it's not a big expense, but it really dresses up what you're trying to showcase in your work. Just simple paper.
Yeah, and
And
I was actually going to mention that too, because you mentioned a little bit about background, and you don't want your background to compete with your picture either. So sometimes you'll find like a really cool background, but it takes away from your picture, or it has different lines that might take away from your picture. So making sure that maybe the background is a little bit more plain, if your picture is bright, colorful, or if your pictures or your artwork is, maybe it's a wood sculpture or something that's maybe a little bit more plain. Maybe you have something in the background that makes it pop out a little bit more. So thinking about what's in the background, if you have a lot of lines in your artwork, putting it against a brick wall or something with a lot of lines is going to really make it difficult for people to really see what you want them to see. They're going to get distracted by the picture. So really thinking about all things, not just your object that you're taking a picture of, but what's around it as well. I think like you mentioned the dining room table, but there's a lot of other things that could be on the wall that might, that might make it stand out, or what have you. So I actually was reading something about people who had set their artwork on the floor, and then they would stand over the top of it and take the picture from the top down. So just to make sure that it's like you're at the same level of the picture and you're getting it straight on. Just watching your shadows on your artwork when you're taking the pictures, I think would be important to make sure that your shadow is not over it. But that's just another tip, depending on what you're taking pictures of.
I was exactly going to go there. I always put things on the floor. Like even from college onwards, I feel like if I can put it on the floor, I can get far enough away from it to get everything lined up right. And
yep.
I did put together, I ran around the Artisan Center a little bit today, and I took a couple pictures to show you like things not to do, right? Just a couple. Because I was like, how do I describe this without showing it? And so I took these two pictures just today on my phone, running around the center. And you can see how the one on the left is like crooked, right? And you can see my reflection in there, same hoodie. And then like this one over here on the right, from a bad angle, there's still a glare on it, right? So when we talk about like getting far enough away from it and lining up your camera right and getting that perspective right, these are the ways not to do that.
Yeah, reflections are the worst to deal with, especially when you have something framed and there's glass. I know every time I frame pictures for a client, I'm like, I'm putting finish on so that I don't have to deal with glass. I don't like glare. So I intentionally do that, but that's just me. But yeah, you don't want to deal with glare, and reflection is by far the hardest thing to work with. So it's light, it's angle, and sometimes putting it on a floor is the easiest thing because the light is coming almost from right above. And as long as you're not in direct line with that light for where your camera is, you're not going to get that reflection, and you should be okay. But yeah, when it's coming from that top angle, no matter where you move, you're going to have that reflection. So you got to like tip it and work it to, or maybe use things like black tagboard to block that light coming in so that you don't get that reflection. When we photograph glass in one of our classes, we're like hiding behind tagboard, like just two pieces of tagboard, and we're shooting right down the middle so that we don't get our reflection in it at all, because no matter what we do, it's there just because of like curvature of glass and things like that. So it can be tricky, but black tagboard goes a long way. I will say that.
I was going to say that before too. Like if you're taking pictures on a tabletop of an item, use tagboard for your background. You can prop it up around it, whether it be black or white, depending on if you want to add a little bit more light behind it, or if you want to absorb some of the glare. It depends on what you're taking pictures of, but you can make a very inexpensive, we call them kind of photography hacks. You can make a photography hack and like a little box for you to put your item in and take pictures on the table. And that's a really great way to do it too, and very inexpensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money on some of your props, like you said, scrapbook paper and things like that.
We have a small light box at the center that we use and that our students and customers use. And it was fairly inexpensive too. You can get a fairly inexpensive light box on Amazon, especially if you're somebody who works small in like jewelry or maybe small ceramics. Getting a small light box, totally do it. That's one of the easiest things I would highly recommend is like just go to Amazon and order one. They come with the lights. You can diffuse the light and you can get that nice like sweep so it looks like it's, you know, no clutter, nothing in the way.
Yeah, they are really, really nice to work with. I was going to see if I could find just one to pop a link in that I know some people have used before, but they're like, for like 40, 50 bucks, you can get this whole kit and it folds up flat, that it's very portable. It also lets you stick like a light coming in the top. So if you want, I mean, honestly, you can get one of those, like can lights for workbenches and stuff like that, that you just clamp lights. That's the word I was looking for. That you just stick on the top and it just shines right through the box. And the box is either white all the way around and it reflects it and diffuses that light at the same time, or it has a little bit of silver in it. So it bounces that light. So it comes in one side and then it bounces all over the rest of the box to light it all the way around. So they're nice, inexpensive options depending on the type of work you're doing.
Looking at my notes to see if there's anything else I want to prompt you guys to talk about. One of the articles I was reading always said like, hey, hang your artwork, but that's really hard to recommend to people who are trying to do this in their homes, right? Because like, you look at my walls behind me, there's not a lot of space to like hang up artwork where there's nothing around. So I think the floor is probably a really good recommendation, especially for our potters and people who are making three-dimensional items.
Yes.
I think the floor is great. Or like Chelle, go outside, you know, stick those mugs in the grass.
There's a nail on the side of my garage that's, I don't know what it was there for, I found it. But that's what I use to hang my paintings when I'm outside.
That's so good.
No one can see it from far away, so I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
And if you know it works for you, that's perfect.
Yeah, and a lot of my pieces are large, so the floor wouldn't work because I'd have to stand on a ladder to make that happen, and wouldn't be
Ladder.
One of my favorite things, this is one of my favorite tricks, is I go to the Restore and I buy flooring. I buy tile, I buy laminate flooring, and you can, I mean, depending on the space you need, you just buy what you need. And it's so cheap. I think I got these massive stone tiles. They are huge. And I got 4 of them. And I think they were $1 a piece. And then their regular smaller tiles, they're 10 cents, 25 cents or something a piece. Like you could get a ton of it and just have a bunch of different backgrounds that you create. I know some photographers who do some smaller items again, but they'll just get like a plywood board, they'll run to the Restore, grab some tile, they'll actually grout it up and set it up, and then they just have these backgrounds, and so it looks like a giant backsplash for some tabletop stuff, and then they'll have laminate flooring as the base of it. And so it can be simple things. I like being as thrifty as possible when it comes to that stuff. So the Restore I'm not allowed to go in it by myself, let's just say.
Such a good idea. I didn't even think of that. And you know, like the vinyl flooring and all of that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Smart. So I was writing down other things that I think are really important. We talked about lighting and kind of that natural lighting for the color. I don't think we need to get too much into camera settings because I don't know that everybody has cameras, but if you have any tips or tricks on what you think are kind of generic camera tips, I think that might be helpful.
I think if you have control over, I know there's some apps you can buy that gives you more manual control on your phone. So if you're just using your phone, it might be worth investing the couple of dollars to get an actual camera app that'll kind of work with the aperture and the shutter speed and things like that, so that you have a little bit more control over that. You know, even just if you get control over the aperture, and for those that don't know much about that, that's like the out of focus parts in your image. So like right now, when I'm looking at my screen, I can see everything behind me, and there's quite a bit of focus, where if I were to, like portrait mode on your phone or something, it blurs out the whole background. It's using a more open aperture. It's just opening that lens a little bit more on a camera. And so what happens is the light bounces around and everything falls blurry behind you. So when you have some of that shallower depth of field, you can bring that focus to the art piece that you want. And I think, Carrie, you had mentioned it, where all the stuff in the background becomes a distraction. So by even working with that, if you can't totally eliminate it, if you have the option to play with that aperture, the lower the number, the more blurry the stuff is going to be in the background. So where you have that option, I would highly recommend that.
I had literally written down aperture in my notes, and I was like, I think that's the most important thing to talk about, but I'm not an expert, so I just wanted to have my little guidance here. Do you guys have any tips on editing your photos and how you go about doing that, or how much editing you would recommend?
I think for me, I wouldn't over edit. Like, you want to, if the color is off, you'd want to correct the color. You definitely want to crop. So like if it's crooked, or making sure all your lines are even. If it's a little too dark, you might want to increase the exposure a little bit to brighten it up. There's little things that you can do post-processing. If you're using your phone, I think my favorite app on my phone that I use is Snapseed. It's a free app. It's a really nice editing tool. On your phone. I have obviously Lightroom and Photoshop and all the bells and whistles, but on my phone I prefer just to use Snapseed because it's a little bit easier to utilize on the phone, and you can make some really quick adjustments on there on the fly. So I think I wouldn't try to make it too over the top, because otherwise they're not going to know what your artwork really looks like, right? You just really want to correct the basics. I think that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I agree. Correcting the basics. And then for cropping, one of the things I use is in Photoshop, they've got the perspective crop tool. That's a huge saver. So it'll allow you to grab, so if you take a photo that's kind of a little bit off kilter, it'll allow you to grab the four corners of the image, so the painting, and then it'll correct it out, which helps a ton, so that it's not, I think I don't have to be as picky trying to line up and make sure everything's perfect. When I'm taking the photo, I'm able to correct it afterwards.
I agree. That perspective crop can be a lifesaver, especially with like painting and things that are framed out. It's so easy, just grab the corners and then it's completely square when you're done.
If I like have a scrap of something here. So like they're talking about like when it's, how that's on a rectangle, if it's taken a picture of, and how you can get it just right. So the 90-degree corners, but when you take a picture and it's kind of wonky, you can use that perspective tool to sure it up real nice.
Yeah.
And
if you do have something with those edges, and if it depends on the camera you're using, you get a little bit of distortion from either like a zoom or being too close, or, to something that it curves a little bit. There's some lens correction options too, in like Photoshop and Lightroom and the mobile versions and things like that, that will kind of take that curvature out and make it more flat and square.
So if these people that are here with us tonight are trying to do this from home with a cell phone, social media is probably fine. Maybe even juried show applications kind of stuff is fine. But really, if they're talking like reprint or professional images, you would recommend a better camera or even working with a professional?
I would.
I would as well.
You just know you're going to get the right lighting and stuff like that when that happens. And it's going to save you a lot of time, in all honesty, because I mean, think about how long you take like photographing, like I got to get the right light. I mean, just people taking selfies, they take, 30 of them before they get the one they want to share. you're going to save so much time by having somebody else do that if that, you know, if the hurdle of getting the light right, getting the camera right, and things like that, it's just less headache.
I think also from a business perspective, you have to think about like what your focus is. Like if your focus, I feel like Chelle is more of a, she has her painting, but she also knows her camera well, can take good pictures, but not everybody's in that same boat, right? Like just like some business owners don't know how to do accounting, right? And so they'll send their tax work out to have somebody else do it. So don't feel bad if for those like important things you need to have somebody else help you with it. I think making sure that it's done right is more important. And people farm work out all the time to make themselves more efficient. So if it gives you more time in the studio to make the things that you want to make, then I think it's well worth the money to be able to do it, especially if you're going to make money off of those prints as well. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. If you're doing prints and you don't feel comfortable taking photos or you don't want to invest the money, absolutely get it done somewhere else. It's going to save you so much time, energy. You know, I've got the camera because I also do like doing just general photography, things like that. If it weren't for that interest, and if it weren't for the background that I do already know Photoshop, I would not be taking photos of my own artwork. There is no way I would do it.
Carrie, I'm so glad you brought up the business end of things. I think that's so important because photography shouldn't be a hurdle. You know, if you're an amazing artist making all of this work and nobody ever gets to see it, that's a hurdle. So if it means you're taking pictures on your phone and posting to your social media, that's awesome. But it might be something that you want to consider farming out, like an accountant or your taxes and all that really fun stuff. I also want to bring up Ellen's comment in the chat because I think that's really important too, is like making fabric or making journals or stickers, or, you know, when you want to do something like that with an image you've created, having a good photograph is going to be super important. And I know that it's a conversation I've had with a couple of other people that are in this conversation tonight about what to do with your paintings, right? You know, you can sell one painting, but if you make prints of it, or if you make sketchbooks or journals or stickers or fabric, anything like that, it's another way to kind of expand your reach by making one painting and doing a whole bunch with it. If you guys don't have anything else you want to talk about, I talked about mistakes and perspective and color and all of that fun stuff. I would love to take some questions from anybody here with us if you guys have any specific questions or conversations or topics, anything like that. Oh, Kendra wrote, any recommendations on phone camera settings?
I guess my biggest thing is to make sure you don't have the auto flash turned on.
Yes.
You don't want that accidentally going off while you're trying to do stuff and maybe the light's a little bit darker than you want. You want your camera to slow down a bit and soak up as much light of that natural light rather than have the flash go off. That's the biggest thing.
When I'm shooting stuff specifically for social media, I shoot in square mode so that I don't have to crop it later.
That's a good idea.
Laziness, but saves me a ton of time.
Oh, that's so smart. I never thought of that. Especially for Instagram. That's such a great tip.
I mean, most cameras are pretty limited in what settings are available. If you do have a camera that does allow you to do certain settings, like I mentioned, that aperture, if you can play with that, the lower the number, the bigger the more blur you're going to get. So whatever that smallest number that you can get, or going on that smaller side with that aperture, that's gonna help. And just kind of let the rest fall where it falls. You know, your camera will only give you so much as far as control, or your phone, I should say. So if you focus on the aperture, see where the rest falls, and if it's not quite what you want, then start playing with some of the other things. Like if it lets you set your ISO, that's just its sensitivity to light. So maybe you got like that blur that you want, but it's still a little dark. And when we're hand holding phones, I hesitate saying mess with the shutter speed option, because if you have to go slower because it is dark, your movement's gonna cause some motion blur, and that's never good when you're trying to show textures and details in your work. So I'd go with that ISO setting if that's an option that you have too, and start increasing that, because that just allows more of your sensor in your phone to be sensitive to that light and pick it up better.
So, and I think Jessica mentioned this earlier, but that portrait mode on your phone is really kind of giving you that blur effect. The thing you have to be careful of is that you have enough in focus that your whole product that you're taking a picture of is in focus when you're using that portrait mode, that you're not getting blurry edges. So you might have to step back a little bit. Sometimes, especially with phones, I find that it'll get blurry if you're a little too close. And so you might want to back up just a few steps and then do the cropping on it, because it isn't automatic. You think your phone will just do it, but then when you look at it, you're like, why did that picture get blurry or whatever? And it might just be the light, like it was a little bit dimmer, and so you have to hold that phone steadier or put it on a tripod. So those are just some things to kind of think about. But I have found that if I'm too close to an image with my phone, sometimes it will get blurry. Or not in focus, like it's just out of focus. It just doesn't look right. So just taking a few steps back should allow that camera to focus a little bit better on your image, because the lenses on cameras are really designed to focus at a certain length. And I don't think that the phone camera is really a macro camera where you can get super close to it. And I think that's probably part of the problem.
The other thing I'd recommend on a phone, I'm not sure if some phones have better cameras, but anytime I try to zoom in on my phone camera, the photo is a lot worse quality. So what I end up doing is just taking the photo and then cropping it down afterwards. And I think that leads me to better quality photos in the end.
Agreed.
Yeah, you'll get noise in it if you zoom too much. It just gets kind of grainy.
Yep, pixelates and stuff too.
Do you guys recommend a tripod for photographing artwork and kind of stabilizing your camera or your phone?
I would. It's going to make your life easier. Because you can set a timer then on your phone, so that, or whatever camera you're using, any of them will allow you to set that timer, so you can set it down. I took it in the kitchen, otherwise I'd have one right here. So that you can put it on that tripod, snap your phone right in, but then you set the timer and then you're not touching it at all, and there's no potential shake to destroy some of that detail you're trying to capture. That's never a bad idea, and you can get nice ones for pretty cheap.
Pretty cheap, yeah, really cheap.
And I got a phone connection with the ring light that I bought. So it connects to my normal tripod, and then the ring light can grab my phone. So
Exactly where I was going to go with it. I have one that like clamps onto my work table with the ring light and the phone, so that when I'm making things right here, it can do that right from above for me, and I don't have to worry about it. So I can even do, like some time-lapse video and things like that,
Video
where I'm not touching it or like trying to hold it still while I'm making artwork. I think it was like $30 on Amazon or something like that, and it was perfect.
I was just going to say, it's a perfect Christmas gift.
It is.
Especially if you're somebody who wants to show your process. Like, that's one of my favorite things about art, is really seeing how artists do their artwork and how it kind of comes to life. I think a little off the topic of photography, but for your business and kind of showing that insider look of what you're making, I think those videos and things like that are really helpful.
my most watched reel is me mixing paint.
See?
Yeah, people love that stuff.
How is that possible?
Those kind of things will pull people in to look at the rest of your profile, right? If they get hooked by a couple of videos like that, they're going to poke around and see what else you work on and what else you do.
Video has a higher engagement on social media than still photos. So, and even when you're posting stuff too, I mean, now I feel like I'm talking marketing stuff, but when you're posting stuff too, even using like if you're using Instagram, using the carousel feature, so they have to scroll through multiple photos, that in video is going to get a much, much higher engagement than just a single photo posting. So even though video is not, you know, totally on topic, it is very much the same thing. If you want to think of it that way, it's just a moving picture is all it is. So all those concepts are very much the same, and that ring light's excellent for that.
I see Ellen's question in the chat. It says, any hints for using a ring light? I have one, but I've never used it.
They're very much just like any other light that you would use, you know, play with, you know, just turn it on and shine it on something and play with different angles and things like that. I think usually having stuff just a little off to the side when you use that ring light, that's casting those shadows and textures that I kind of mentioned earlier. So most ring lights are just flip it on and you're ready to go. Some will have different colors that you can change it to, like a warmer color, a cool daylight balance type of a thing, and you can switch it. I would kind of work with whatever other light you have available. So if you have a lot of window light coming in, try and match the color of that ring light to go with it, so you don't get that contrast in, you know, yellow versus blue and things like that. But in all honesty, it's pretty much just plug and play and just find that right angle to get the detail that you want and textures.
Yeah, and if you're using it with natural light, you might just be filling in the shadows a little bit. So then you'd be pointing it to where the darker spots are so that you can kind of fill in that. Or even using, if you use like the white pegboard or something to bounce it off of, or even something to diffuse it a little bit more to give it a softer look so you don't get the glare. That might be nice too. So it really is playing. The fun thing about it is you can play with it. The negative of that is you could spend hours playing with it, because I mean, like, I have fun with it, and you know, you just don't stop, and then you just keep going and going, and then your afternoon went away and you had other things that you needed to do. So that's, I think I get distracted. It's like, oh, bright shiny light, let's go play, you know.
Squirrel.
Exactly.
A follow-up question. She said, would you use it inside of a light box?
You could use it to shine through a light box if it's bright enough, because the light boxes have a bit of a diffusion to it. So when whatever light you use to shine through, you're going to lose a little bit of that power because it has to go through that translucent material. But you could absolutely use that to shine through a light box. That's a great way, like Terry mentioned, if it's like got a bright, you know, spot on it, to diffuse it a little bit so that it's not a shiny whatever on your subject. So that would be a great option and an easy setup, really.
Does anybody else have any other questions or any topics we didn't cover that you'd really like us to talk about?
I think I'm just going to add one thing, and the reason why this interested me so much is because, and I think it goes to that marketing piece that Jessica was talking about as well, but having pictures or your artwork in your home, in your studio, out for people to see, I think even if it's not for sale right at the moment, I just think it's really important for them to be able to see what you can do, because otherwise, you know, you've got it in an album or you've got it on social media and you've got none of your work in your house or none of your work in your studio. People don't have that chance to kind of explore, to see like how far you've come and what you've done. So that's one of the things that I just moved into a new house, and I travel a lot. So I'm going through all my travel photography and I'm printing, and that's what I'm hanging in my house. And my mom is a little upset because she cross-stitched like a ton of pictures, but they've been up on my walls for years. So it's time for something new. So I'm replacing her artwork with my artwork now. So making that transition. But I just think it's important to put it out, because that's work that you've done, and really good things that you've done. So I think it's good for people to see that you also appreciate it as much as you want them to appreciate it.
You know, you made me think of something that I think is really important. We held a small art show on the main campus just a couple of weeks ago, and one of our potters was there with us, and she does a lot of commission work like that. So she wants to showcase not only what she has in front of her, but so she has a photo slideshow, and we figured out how to pull it up on her iPad so it could be circulating through while people were shopping her booth, so they could see, look at all of this work I can do. You know, if there's something here that really interests you that's not physically in front of you, I can make that for you in the color that you want. So really showcasing all you can do to your audience is huge. And, you know, she wouldn't have a slideshow of all of her work if she hadn't been photographing it for all the years she's been doing this. So I think it's really important to be just taking those pictures and documenting everything you're working on.
It's also cool, like, if somebody buys something that you've made and maybe they put it in an office, or, you know, it's on display someplace, go take a picture of it there too. I think that's pretty cool for social media purposes as well. If somebody else bought it and they have it hanging up, or they have it, you know, on display when you walk in, I think that would be cool to see, you know, where your artwork goes, and for people to see it kind of in use as well.
I love that. Yeah, especially like, even if it's somebody like using one of your coffee mugs, or, you know, something like that, all that functional work, I think giving that a highlight is a really good idea.
You can even ask them to post it on their own social media and tag you in it, because that's just expanding your audience on top of it. And then you can then also use that.
That's okay, we've got about 15 more minutes if anybody else has any questions or rabbit holes they want us to go down. Okay, I'm trying to be more comfortable with silence. That's a goal of mine. So I'm going to give it another few seconds to see if anybody pops in. Oh, Kendra did post a question. Buying your own lighting, is it worth it?
I think it's worth having something, to whatever degree you decide, whether it's just a ring light, whether it's just a clamp light, like having something can really make a huge difference in how those images turn out. So it really depends on, you know, the extent of what you want to do with it. Like if you really do need real detailed shots and stuff like that, and you want to do it on your own, it's worth investing in that higher quality lighting equipment to do it. I would suggest having the camera to go with it at that point. But otherwise, yeah, having, I mean, as simple as you want to make it, light is light, and there's ways to work with it. You know, like this light that I have on me, it's it's bouncing off of the wall that it's right next to, because otherwise I would have this massive shiny forehead right here. So having, you know, it's just a light, but I could take some photos with it because I'm bouncing it off the light, and suddenly my entire wall is my light source. So as long as it's bright enough to get what you want, there's ways to diffuse. You can take a white sheet, a thin sheet, a Kleenex, anything to soften that light, regardless of what it is. So it's worth it. Just know the extent of how you want to use it, because it's hard when you buy light and then you never use it.
I have a light in my room, like it's one of those college dorm lights that you can adjust. But knowing that you can buy light bulbs with different tints to it too. Like you don't have to have a soft bulb. You can have a bright white bulb. You can have, I mean, there's so many different bulbs that you can buy. Go to Menards, there's a slew of them. So you can get the effect that you want with the different light options as well. So it doesn't always have to be a fancy light. You're just trying to illuminate it so that you don't have to use maybe a hard flash on it in like a central location, or you want to mix it with the actual natural light that you have. I think you don't have to get super fancy on it if you don't want to. But if you have the nice camera, then, you know, that's your next step, right? Like I like to buy things. So it would be my next purchase when it comes to photography.
And I think too, with lighting, you don't have to spend a ton of money. You know, the ring lights, you can find ring lights for 20, 30 bucks. I have a set of these little things. Bought them on Facebook Marketplace for $20 for the whole set. They work just fine. They just weren't what somebody was looking for. So that's what I have for lighting. And then I use natural lighting a lot. So even some of my stylized shoots, especially in the spring and summer, I like to just go out in nature and find flowers, and especially flowers that kind of are the same colors as my paintings, take photos by them. I know my lighting's going to be good outside, kind of thing. So get creative.
I would also say if you're using natural light, like probably in summer at noon isn't the best time to be out. Like, 9-10 o'clock in the morning, even earlier, you get a real nice soft light. And then later in the afternoon too, you kind of get that sunset light. That might give you a different coloration as it's setting, but those tend to be a little, even mid-afternoon, as long as it's not a high bright sun, or finding a nice shady spot to take pictures too that diffuses the light more naturally.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm trying to find a smaller size than what I'm finding right now, but let me just grab this link right here. You can even invest if you want to use natural light, but still enhance what natural light is available. Or if you are out on a day where it's, noon. Oh, that's a really long link. I'm sorry. But it's having a reflector is a great option if you just want to use natural light, because not only can you use like the silver or the gold or even the white if it's really bright outside just to bounce that light and fill some of those shadows in, but you can use the black side to block things that are reflecting. You can take off the outside and that translucent material. That can be, I call it a porta-cloud, where you can just have, well, you probably need somebody, but just have it over the top of your subjects so that that sun is diffused just a little bit if it is too bright, but you can only go out at 11 o'clock in the morning and the sun's pretty high. Having something like that is a very small investment, and there's different sizes, obviously, for whatever size artwork you have, but something like that can be simple enough where you might not need other lighting, and then you can just manipulate the natural light you have.
I'm going to make my third call for questions. Anything else? Anything we missed? Well, I think this was really awesome. I really enjoyed chatting and getting to know all of you guys and a little bit more about photographing and your kind of tips and tricks. I wrote down a few notes. I'm surprised I had a whole page here ready to go of like if I needed to fill in on some things, but I've learned a few things and I appreciate that. That's one of the best parts about these meetings is always taking away something new and also getting to meet some new people. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it. We will have this edited and posted to social media and our YouTube channel as soon as we can. And I guess it's the end of the year. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all those fun things. And we'll see you guys next year.
Yay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.